Great Depression, the dynamics of family changed drastically. Most families didn't have a working father, and the mothers worked outside the home.
The Great Depression tore through the heart of the cities. By the early 1930s, more than half of all Americans lived in urban areas. Cities were once symbols of opportunity, where the American dream was supposed to come true. But during the Depression, they quickly became battlegrounds of survival. Factories shut down, businesses closed, and entire communities were left to fend for themselves. Breadlines became as common as streetlights, and unemployment in urban centers soared. With 15 million Americans out of work and 75% of urban families feeling the direct impact, life in the city became about everyday survival. Yet in the midst of this hardship, city dwellers found ways to adapt, create new systems, and hold their communities together. In this video, we'll explore how people living in urban America weathered the storm of the Great Depression. So let's dive in. The urban landscape in crisis. Cities were already homes to millions of people, but the Depression turned these urban spaces into crisis zones. As factories closed and industries collapsed, entire neighborhoods were abandoned or left in ruins. People who once worked in factories or office buildings found themselves standing in breadlines, unable to provide for their families. In cities like Chicago, Detroit, and New York, the population faced an unprecedented economic disaster. Industrial centers, which once fueled the economy, were now lifeless. The unemployment rate in urban areas soared high, which left millions without work. Streets once filled with the hustle and bustle of everyday city life became hauntingly quiet. Families were forced to figure out how to get by, and for many, it meant abandoning the old ways of survival and adopting entirely new systems. People learned to live without the luxuries they once took for granted, but they didn't give up. The survival strategies they developed in these hard times were nothing short of ingenious. Economic adaptation in the city. As jobs became scarce, many city dwellers turned to unconventional ways to make a living. One of the first and most visible signs of economic adaptation was the rise of street vending. In nearly every major city, you could find people selling anything from fruit to newspapers to secondhand clothing. Street vendors became part of the city's landscape, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. People who had once worked in offices, factories, or retail shops were now finding themselves selling anything they could on the streets just to bring in some cash. However, street vending wasn't the only way people survived. A vast underground economy developed during the Great Depression. With a steady income, people turned to informal labor markets. Jobs that once seemed unthinkable for certain groups of people became a necessity. Women in particular found themselves working in roles they would never considered before, cleaning houses, sewing clothes for neighbors, or even running small businesses from their homes. The city's economy became a patchwork quilt of small, informal jobs and bartering. People traded goods and services and tried to bypass traditional markets. If you didn't have money, you had to have something else to offer. This underground economy kept the city alive, though its exact working went unnoticed by the government or larger institutions. Urban survival mechanisms. Living in the city during the Depression required people to get creative, especially when it came to housing. With rents skyrocketing and evictions becoming increasingly common, families had to find new ways to live together. Tenement living became the norm for many, with entire families squeezed into small and overcrowded apartments. And this wasn't limited to just families. People who had lost their homes started looking for any available space, leading to the rise of boarding houses. These were makeshift homes where tenants rented rooms for cheaper prices and shared kitchen spaces and bathrooms with strangers. In some neighborhoods, people started organizing rent parties. These parties weren't for fun exactly, they were essential for financial needs. These gatherings were a mix of survival and community spirit. A neighbor would host the party in their home and invite people from the area. Guests paid a small fee to enter, and there would be food, music, and dancing. Sometimes a local band or piano player would perform, but the main goal was to collect enough money to pay the host rent. A few dollars from each person could be the difference between staying or getting evicted. At the same time, the city's housing market became a place of shared struggle. People took in boarders or roommates to help split the rent. Others moved in with relatives or friends. Bills were divided, meals were shared, and living spaces became crowded. These tight quarters often led to tension, but they also created strong bonds. Neighbors helped each other with chores, childcare, and finding odd work. People learned to depend on one another. These shared living spaces turned into small communities built on mutual support. The idea of privacy often disappeared, but in its place came a sense of togetherness. Food survival in the city. Feeding a family during the Great Depression became a total struggle. With food prices skyrocketing and wages falling, many families had to find ways to make a little go a long way. Soup kitchens became lifelines for many, especially in cities with large populations of unemployed workers. Churches, local charities, and community organizations set up kitchens to provide hot meals for those who couldn't afford them. But soup kitchens weren't the only strategy. In many urban neighborhoods, people began to experiment with urban gardening. Empty lots, backyards, and even rooftops were turned into small gardens where people grew vegetables to feed their families. They became known as thrift gardens. These gardens weren't always able to supply all of a family's need, but they helped stretch food budgets and provided a small sense of self-sufficiency in an otherwise uncertain environment. Neighborhoods shared food as well. People traded vegetables, bread, or whatever else they could get their hands on. Neighborhood food sharing networks emerged where families would exchange food and help each other out. Waste reduction became crucial, and even leftovers were repurposed. Leftover bread was turned into pudding, bones were used for soup, and every scrap of food was saved. Community resilience. The emotional toll of the Great Depression was as severe as the physical hardship. Families were struggling, but so were entire neighborhoods. Yet despite the constant stress and uncertainty, city dwellers found a way to come together. Ethnic communities in particular formed mutual aid societies, which were local organizations that helped members pay bills, find work, and bury their dead. These societies gave a sense of security in an unstable world. They provided much-needed emotional support. People would visit each other's homes, offer advice, and even help raise children. By sticking together, people were able to resist the crushing despair that threatened to overwhelm them. There was strength in numbers, and it was through solidarity that many found the courage to keep going. The lasting impact of urban survival networks. The Great Depression left a deep impression on urban America. Out of the ashes of hardship, new social networks and survival strategies were born. Today, we find such communal living hard to believe in, but this is what's needed when capitalism betrays society and you need support. True strength is always in going back to our communal roots. People had learned to share, to support one another, and to resist isolation. They had discovered that collective responsibility triumphs over any individualism. As depressing as the times might have been, they do teach us a lot about community resilience and survival strategies. And as we are facing massive inflation around the globe today again, we can definitely look back to community networks rather than winging it all alone. If you made it here to the end, drop a comment telling us what aspect of communal living you would like the most. And if you enjoyed this perspective on history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories of America's past. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.